We don't get ahead by winning. We get ahead by seeing our own foibles, our own fallacies, our own weaknesses, our own anger, our own unforgiving, our unlovingness, our own sense of that. We get ahead when we examine ourselves with honesty and do the best we can to transform that. Most of us don't have 28 years in prison to do that, but we do have a daily experience of making judgments about others. And we do have the chance to befriend other people. And so I believe it's incumbent upon us who are on the spiritual path not to be right, but to be loving, not to dominate, but to lift up, and not to be afraid to make corrections if we're going in the wrong direction. Happy 1st of June. Today I'm approaching a topic that has given me some concern. Is, am I my brother's keeper? And of course, I'm sure if you guys grew up in a church or just had nice parents, you would know that you were your brother's keeper because they would tell you you were supposed to do that. You know, the story comes from the Genesis, the first book in the Bible, and it's about Adam and Eve. They have two sons, Cain and Abel. And you've heard the phrase, raising Cain, right? Well, Cain was jealous of his brother Abel. His brother did a sacrifice, and God liked that sacrifice more than his sacrifice. He killed him. And God comes along and says, hey, Cain, where's your brother? And Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? And that is the topic of today. Are you your brother's keeper? Now, as I was discussing this with a friend, and this discussion lasted for several hours, the question is, are you going to say anything about the world conditions, the societal conditions, or the wars in other places, etc.? And I was reminded of this phrase that if I say anything, I lie, but if I remain silent, I am a coward. I was thinking coward sounded pretty good. Because it's, you know, it's almost, we're so polarized as a society. Generally in this room, people are much more softer on the edge than in some other context. But I just want to say that my intent is never to step on someone's political or personal held beliefs or nationalism or however you do it. But I do think one of the things we as a society need to realize is how to be more than another voice crying foul, and to become a spiritual radiance of love and acceptance. Because I believe the spiritual radiance of love and acceptance ultimately is what is needed. I was looking up the history of Gaza, and it fortunately went back to about 3,000 years. And it has been a crossroads for all that time. And most of the history with Canaanites and Philistines and all of that, I would sound erudite if I could list it for you, but it really wouldn't affect what seems to be happening today, which it seems to me like what's happening today is the place has gotten out of hand. Too many children, too many innocents are being killed, and it needs to stop. And having said that, I realize that one of the things that has caused this is the trauma that happened in World War II. And so then where do we stop on the pointing fingers and saying this is too much and you're at fault here? Where does it stop? I started to think about the whole thing, you know, it's like the case with the immigration these days. It seems so pretty harsh and actually unreasonable the way some of them are being treated. That too, you know, I started to realize that every person in this country at one point was an immigrant. Even the Indians were an immigrant from Asia, but we all have come here as immigrants. And the beautiful thing about our country is that we've been able to hide much of our sins in the way we tell our history. But if you look fairly honestly, you would have to say that when Europeans came to North America, they basically did a genocide, and they followed that with slavery. It's not a very pretty picture, but if you don't realize that many of the problems that we have in this country are old problems. They're habitual problems. And so it's harder to fix them if you don't actually acknowledge how they came about. At this moment, there seems to be an ascendancy of white is right, but it could easily be tempered if we all actually knew our heritage, those of us who are all of us. And we're all in this together. And so if you think about it, it's really hard to know how to fix it. And so in this conversation that went on for hours was, what do you think the cures are? And as I started to think about it, it seemed to me like the method of cure is not very different than what we've been talking about in here for some time, which is that we need to come to a deep and profound realization that we are not what can be seen, but what transcends our appearances. That we are not bodies only. We have a body. I actually have a body, and I have 2 cars. We have a body. But we're something actually transcendent of the body. We are the consciousness, the awareness, that which we call spiritual. That is what transcends, and who our deepest identity is. That's who we are. And when we connect with that, and we stay connected with it long enough to get deep enough to realize that this spirit that we are, this consciousness that we are, actually doesn't stop with our own small identity, but is networked everywhere because it is part of the one presence, the one power, God the good. That's who we are. And if we could ever get this main idea, this primary idea that Unity has been putting out there for the last 100 and some years, that there is only one presence, one power, God, and how you define God would be better if you didn't think of him as a guy with a white beard sitting up in the heavens, but as this universal consciousness of which we are living expressions of. And when we can do that and remember that clearly enough, we cannot easily look at another and harm them, because we know as we harm them, we harm ourselves. And as we judge them, we judge ourselves. And as we think less of them, we think less of ourselves. And there is no one of us that is innocent, because we're all tied together. And none of us are guilty, because we're all tied together. Those questions don't seem to matter when you wake up to who you truly are, because innocence and guilt is at the level of the body and the mind. It is not at the level of spirit. Jesus is dying, being crucified on the cross, and he says, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing, because their minds were caught in thus and them and us. And this is the great sin that transcends what's happening in one country or one time. It is them and us. You are not me. What's really the solution could only be a deeper awakening, because let's say your side is behind now and not ascendant, and so you denigrate those in authority, or you hold out against them, and you wish them ill, and you want something bad to happen to them. And then the tide changes, and now you're ascendant, and they wish the same to you. Have we gotten anywhere? Has anybody gotten anywhere? Our job, I think, those of us who are looking for a real solution, may prefer, in temporary moments, victory. But it takes more than victory to change the world. You know, I think of the 2 world wars. 2 world wars. First one, absolutely ridiculous. Do y'all remember your history well enough to know it's just absolutely ridiculous? There was nothing was gained, only lives were lost. But we were smart enough, the victor's side, to put reparations on Germany at such a deep and profound level that the thing that sounded best to them was Hitler. Didn't work. Punishing them didn't work. One of the great things that happened to this country after World War II was we rebuilt Europe. And we made a much more peaceful world. We even rebuilt Germany. A different attitude of mutuality is so much more powerful than one of victory. I want to read you a little story. The story is told of a farmer whose corn earned the winning prize at the state fair. One year, the reporter interviewed him and learned something about how he grew his corn. The farmer reported that he shared his prize-winning seeds with his neighbors. When asked why, the wind picks up the pollen from the ripening corn and swirls it from field to field. If my neighbors grow inferior corn, cross-pollination will steadily degrade the quality of my corn. If I'm to grow good corn, I must help my neighbors grow good corn. I was also reading about essentially the secret life of plants and the fungus that goes between the trees, and that in that mycelium, what it does is it kind of connects the trees. Interesting thing, much of the sugars that the tree creates through photosynthesis goes to the roots and to feed the fungus. And then the fungus does a good job of getting nutrients that it's hard for the tree to get. And so there's a symbiotic relationship. But there apparently is more mileage of fungus strands in a spoonful than there is in 10 miles of road. I mean, it's amazing. The connectiveness. And one of the things that happens is that they are discovering that trees, which you would think were solitary and would do better if they got all the sunlight. If they got all the sunlight, took all the nutrients, that they would do better. But it turns out what they do is they share with each other. They not only share nutrients, there's a really good, with the living, there's a story of a 500-year-old birch tree whose trunk was about 5 feet thick. But it was down, and the scientist went to check it, and he carved off the bark, I guess, and found that it was alive in there, that there was chlorophyll underneath there. And then what he determined from that was that the plants that had been around it were still supporting it because it didn't have leaves, it wasn't standing up and getting sunlight. It was on the ground. It was 500 years after it was chopped down. So, continuing this conversation about what should we do about this, it seems like as a community, there's something we should do about these social events? And yes, there might be, but I don't know what it is. I wish I had that wisdom to know exactly what to do to make a difference in a world that we do not like to see on television or hear on the radio. And it seems to me that there's a harshness in the air, but I believe it's been there for many generations. We're not the first. It is easier for us to see it because we have media that goes all over the world, and it's easy for media to find something that is really harsh. And in our country, I think we're going through a cycle of harshness. We've been through softer cycles, but we're going through the cycle of harshness. So it does feel more immediate and present. But is the answer to harshness to be harsh also? There was a studies done about smiling. As you walk down the street and you smile at a stranger, the ripple effect is quite phenomenal, because one of the things that happens when you smile is that different chemicals in your body kick in, and you feel better for smiling. But the other person, having been smiled at, day is brightened, and the tendency for them to smile at someone else goes up also. And we, like trees, are sharing the essential goodwill, not through fungus, but through smiling. And when we smile, when we do an act of kindness, when we're tender to someone, when we recognize their humanity, when we recognize how many people that we see in front of us are hurting in their core, leading quiet lives of desperation, and we do some act of kindness, there does seem to be no immediate reward that they would do it back for us. We feel better ourselves, but we also start that ripple that goes through the current, goes through the roots of our society. It's a tough world. I think most of us in this room have no idea how tough a world it is for others, because we have lived in this country where we haven't had a war on our soil since 1865. We've carried the fight in many other places, but we ourselves have not felt it. And so I think we sometimes lack the deep compassion for those who are starving, or those who are homeless, or those who are without in many ways. It's not a great quality that we have just shut down our aid to foreign countries. It's not a great quality. It's nothing to be proud of, in my opinion. And what to do about it, I'm not sure at this moment. But the world that we live in, that we share with other people, is the same world outside as it is inside. We treat the world as we are inside. And if we have become so self-centered and so incredibly interested in our comfort, I have some critiques of the country for national interest, which often means oil or resources. It doesn't mean the happiness of all mankind. It would be nice if we would shift to that in that direction, but the only way we would shift to that direction is if more of us get that in this world we are not isolated beings, but part of the whole. And only by deeply getting that will we act in such a way that the ripples keep coming out every day from us, and the votes that come out from us every day are that. And the words we say will be encouragement rather than discouragement, and the love we will give will be the love that we see amplified from person to person to person. And then the words that Jesus said will make sense. You're supposed to love God with all your heart and soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so when you don't know how to act, you can pray for your enemies. You can love those who persecute you. be charitable to those who need it. You can be kind to everybody you see because you know that as you are kind to them, the air gets fresher. I'm going to read you another story. This is a story about Anthony Ray Hinton, and it comes from his book, The Sun Does Shine. After spending 28 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit, Hinton was exonerated in 2015. When he was initially sentenced, he asked to speak to the court and proceeded to forgive each one of those who held his life and his fate in their hands. He told them he didn't hate them, and in fact, he said he loved them. During the nearly 3 decades behind bars, he taught his fellow death row inmates the power of unconditional love through Bible and book studies. A white supremacist who was about to be executed was asked whether he had any final words. He was one of the men Hinton had befriended, and he observed that the very people he had been taught to hate were the ones who, in prison, taught him how to love. I had this math worked out in my head better in my conversation, but essentially it boils down to this. We don't get ahead by winning. We get ahead by seeing our own foibles, our own fallacies, our own weaknesses, our own anger, our own unforgiving, our unlovingness, our own sense of that. We get ahead when we examine ourselves with honesty and do the best we can to transform that. Most of us don't have 28 years in prison to do that, but we do have a daily experience of making judgments about others. And we do have the chance to befriend other people. And so I believe it's incumbent upon us who are on the spiritual path not to be right, but to be loving. Not to dominate, but to lift up. And not to be afraid to make corrections if we're going in the wrong direction. If we're finding ourselves so angry, we don't know what to do, don't do what you just did. Do something else. Have some ice cream. Do something. So, I must say, you're an easy group to love. Let's practice here. Let us pray. Let us not be the last to realize that we're one with each other, and to love our neighbor as ourselves is just simply to love. For our neighbor is ourself. Let us remember what our mother said. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything. And let us be gentle on ourselves. For kindness begins at home. Perhaps the first order of business to be to make a habit of the morning before you're out of bed to say I love you to yourself and to find reasons to give yourself praise. I believe from there we might naturally come into the world with a smile, a helping hand, and kindness. Let it be so. Amen. I hope you got something out of today's service. We intend to bring you things that will help you in your life become more of who you want to be, give you the freedom of forgiveness and the hope of expectancy that your life will unfold in a way that brings you joy, happiness, and is a contribution to the world. If you would like to contribute to this ministry, please go to unitytriangle.org, hit the donate button, and it will lead you into an easy way of doing that. We thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you again here.